Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen. We're coming to you from Beaver Stadium on Saturday evening. We stuck around here to get some work done, record this for you folks, following a 34-0 Penn State victory over Florida International in Game 2 of the 2025 season. This one gives us a lot to break down. There's some positives that we're going to get to over the course of this show, and then there are some concerns that are evolving a bit over the first two games of non-conference play. If you totally missed this matchup and you're just checking in, you see 34-0, you think, okay, they didn't quite cover the 41-point spread, but we'll take that one to the bank. And take a closer look at this, and you remember it was 10-0 at halftime, despite the Nittany Lions having 6 possessions that reached FIU territory. And there are some layers to the process, and we start to get our mind around these 2-0 Nittany Lions. Daniel, let's bring you in. And as I said, what is it, 81-11 total score in the last couple of games. But James Franklin talking about some concerns. The crowd voiced some frustrations. We heard some boos today in Beaver Stadium, believe it or not. And certainly we have a lot more to talk about on this podcast than perhaps we anticipated going into the afternoon.
Definitely. I think you look at all of our predictions across Lions247 on Thursday afternoon that Mark Brennan put together, and see a lot of 50s up there, some 40s for what we saw from Penn State. I think a lot of us were expecting them to cover that spread, which was at 41.5 points on Saturday morning. But I made the comment to you. I mean, Penn State, these first two teams they played in the non-conference, FIU and Nevada, I wouldn't say either team is very talented. I know James Franklin mentioned that he thought that FIU had some talent out there, and I liked what we saw from Keon Jenkins, just a very, I think, gutsy player. But Penn State just ran into two teams that felt really, really well coached. Jeff Choate, the Nevada coach, I think he did a great job with that defense on how to play Penn State. And then today from Willie Simmons at FIU, you saw a team that wasn't going to back down, wasn't scared. They went for it on 4th down a couple times deep in their own territory. It was a team that I think came in with the plan to not be scared, not play scared against the big bad Penn State team at Beaver Stadium. And I think that those are the other things that when you're trying to forecast these matchups that can be maybe a little bit difficult to get a handle on. But I thought overall, Penn State's 2-0. You made the comment where it's going to look pretty good to some AP voters who, maybe didn't get the chance to follow along with everything and are putting their ballots together later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. But Penn State's 2-0. They're still up in the polls. And once again, I think it could be a long-term benefit that they have this film to go off of and different things to pick apart.
Yeah, I think externally, national, big picture kind of talk. Yeah, you poke your head into this one. You see 34-0. Maybe you catch some highlights, but the kind of some of those voters out there who are just going off of final scores, and we know they exist. You're going to see this score and not really sneeze at it. Of course, our job here as Nittany Lions beat reporters is to dig a lot deeper than that on this particular team. And Daniel, I think that the late fireworks for Penn State, a couple late touchdowns, it widened that margin. 20-0 doesn't sound nearly as good as 34-0 in this matchup. And it gave us more to discuss. Katron Allen had a big run, had a big day. Chaz Coleman did some fun things late in this game, really over the course of the day. We're going to get to those. But let's start with the concerns, because James Franklin acknowledged the inability to finish drives on a consistent basis through 120 minutes of football is a bit of a thorn in the side of Penn State's body of work thus far. And Daniel, you threw some interesting numbers at me a few minutes before we started recording regarding that process and kind of put it in perspective for where Penn State's been at.
Yeah, I have a story going up on Lions247 this Saturday evening that focuses on Drew Aller's performance today, and which I'm sure we'll get to. But near the bottom of it, we had Aller talking about it, so it was something I wanted to touch on. Didn't necessarily think we had enough there to flesh out its own post. But in terms of how Penn State has been finishing drives, they've had the ball 23 times this year across those first two games against Nevada and FIU. They've crossed into opponents' territory 19 times. One of those drives ended at the 20, and then, or not the 20, at midfield. And then another one, the 21st drive, was the end of the Nevada game, which was just a couple handoffs deep in Penn State territory to kill the clock. So that's And then the last two drives today were 3-and-outs in the second half by Penn State. So you've got those 19 drives where you've crossed midfield, and Penn State's only scored touchdowns on 9 of them. I think you look at what you need to do to win games. Some of these you're going to have to score touchdowns and not field goals. I think that was a talking point coming out of last week against Nevada. Today against FIU, they didn't even get field goals on some of these drives. I think what was it that they crossed 6 times in the first half, and you had two touchdowns or no touchdown, 2 field goals, a punt, 2.
Let me help you out. 6 times in the first half, they got a field goal. They had a field goal blocked. They had 2 4th down tries fail, right? And so those things all stacked up. Obviously, they got to the end zone too, and we'll talk about Devontae Ross's day. But even into the third quarter, it extended. They had 7 consecutive possessions to open this game where they got into FIU territory, and they had 13 total points to show for it. And on a day where your defense is doing what it needs to do, and you're playing an opponent from a lower division of college football, you can get away with that. And they got away with it today. But we know the test that away. And if Penn State wants to be playing as long as it possibly can into the 3rd, 4th week of January, it's got to be more efficient than that.
Yeah, it's the thing where I think putting the 2 games together, I think that was illuminating for me. I think the fact that they had some of these drives today that stalled out where they didn't get points, I think that made it loom a little bit larger than last week where you say, they got deep in the Nevada territory or they got gifted, amazing field position. Well, they still came away with 3 points. They still put points on the board. That didn't happen today against FIU. And yeah, I mean, it's 13-0 in the third quarter, like 20-0 going into the fourth before those last 2 touchdowns. And it just felt, really, it never felt totally in doubt, but it just felt very almost awkward in terms of, really what are we seeing today? What's going on? And if Penn State, kind of like what we talked about last week, if you turn some of those 3s into 7s, that looks a lot different. Today, even if you turn some of those 0s into 3s, it looks a little bit different, looks a little bit better for you. So we'll see. I mean, I think Villanova is one more tune-up opportunity to get some of these things right. But 3 weeks from tonight, it's 7:32 right now, so almost exactly 3 weeks from tonight, you're going to be kicking off the whiteout against an Oregon team that just put 69 up on Oklahoma State and isn't going to be scared. So you're going to have to be ready. You're going to have your track shoes on, and you're just going to have to be able to finish. It's kind of simplifies it, but I think it's an important part of the game right now.
You mentioned the offensive performance felt awkward. I think it felt disconnected from the narrative that we've had with this Nittany Lions offense about the continuity with the offensive coordinator and the senior quarterback who made his 31st career start, and the experience and the prowess of the offensive line. And we're going to talk about the O-line in a bit because James Franklin shared some thoughts, and he says that there is meat left on the bone about that performance up front. But Drew Aller, I think, probably typifies today's performance because he did not look in command. I think we used the term in command about 9 times during our postgame podcast after Nevada. And to be honest, I really thought when it came to QB1, you could probably just put that in cruise control and assume that's what you get out of him through these first 3 matchups. Today was certainly at least a hiccup. He had 4 incompletions on his first 5 passes. He had 4 incompletions, I think, on 26 pass attempts in week 1. And ultimately, I think he finished his day with 3 consecutive incompletions. 58% completion today, down from 85% in game 1. He did throw 2 touchdowns. He avoided a turnover, but he did not look comfortable and he did not look in command. And obviously, you do not want to see that becoming any kind of a repeated habit over the course of this campaign, because that's not part of the plan when you've got a quarterback who's played this much and put in this much work with the same offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach.
I know I invoked it in the lead to my story Saturday night, but you see Drew Aller miss Nick Singleton out in the flat on a 3rd down in the second quarter, brings back a couple memories where the stakes very different than they were in January than they are today. But Aller said after the game today that you have to be able to make those throws. He'd been doing it all week during practice. It was a little 3rd and 7. Nick Singleton was lined up in the backfield with Aller, ran a little bubble out to the right side. still would have had to do some work. He would have caught it, I think, 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage and would have needed to get 10 yards to get the first down at that point. But we've seen Nick Singleton make plays in space before. And that's just a simple thing where get the ball to your playmaker in space, let him go. And Aller just missed him. After that play, Aller walked off the field. He had, his hands in his shoulder pads, head down, and he just walked directly to the bench. Slapped a couple hands on the way there. But it was one of those plays where you can tell that, he knew he missed it. After the game, he was really honest about what he didn't do well today. He sounded really hard on himself for his performance. He said a lot of it is the mental side of it, that he's overthinking things and he's not making the easy throws easy at this point. And so I think that that's an interesting look into your senior quarterback at this point. Because like you said, I mean, I think I've been a pretty big Aller booster in terms of, he's a set it and forget it for at least what we saw for the majority of last year. Outside
for about 10 out of 12 games, you feel that way probably, right? And you still wonder about the other two, but
exactly.
But you want to give him a chance to go out there and show what he can do in those other two.
Yeah, and so today it was a little bit surprising to me just to see him so off in the early going. I mean, I think that he's someone that I still have confidence in, but it's going to be. I'm curious what it looks like early next week against Villanova, because we've talked about it where. Okay, we saw what Penn State struggled with last week in terms of like running game, things like that, not getting the tight ends a lot of touches. We saw them come out and rectify that pretty early today against FIU. So building forward, I think that you're really going to be looking at Aller early next week against Villanova, getting him in a rhythm and then seeing where the offense can go from there.
And this position has so much more to do than what statistics will show you. I mean, I think in terms of yardage and touchdowns, he had more of those today than he did last week. But with Aller, he's the conductor. He is the conductor. And we've talked about this, especially last year when he was still early in his junior year and we're trying to figure out where he was in terms of his demeanor and his attitude and everything that goes into being a captain and a leader for the offense. But today you didn't get the sense that he was setting the temperature of the field. It seemed like he was more reacting to the temperature that was on the field around him with some of the miscues, and things seemed to stack up. Again, it's a 34-0 victory, but this is also a week where Drew Aller was announced as a Nike athlete. You had the opposing quarterback at FIU 3 times in his press conference this week refer to Drew Aller as a number 1 pick in the draft type quarterback. And everybody knows the deal outside of this program, inside this program, about where he could be, next spring in that NFL draft conversation. Performance like this, that's going to ding you maybe in that journey. But I think we're focused on what he means to Penn State, trying to get to their ultimate goals. And this, I guess, just leaves room for a little bit of doubt about where he is and where the coaching staff is and how sharp it can look on a consistent basis. Because great teams, number 1 teams in the country, true national championship contenders, it can't be week in, week out. You're kind of guessing on what the past game is going to look like. You're guessing on kind of what the consistency will look like. We're very early in the season. They can have a get-right game next week against Villanova before going into the bye week, and then Oregon comes to town. But right now, through 120 minutes of football, Drew Aller, I think, has a lot to go back into that meeting room as a team captain, starting with himself and then pointing fingers where they need to be pointed among those around him, because he's on finite time, man. The countdown clock is going. His career is going to end in January one way or the other, and he seems like the guy who was very aware of legacy, very aware of his role with this Penn State program since he came to town as a number 1 recruit. And so very curious to see how Drew handles this week, and certainly going into that bye week, because I'd imagine that beyond the coaching staff, he is the number 1 catalyst for progress in this offensive room. And I'm curious if he's the number 1 catalyst for confrontational conversations, because those are going to be had a little bit here this week, starting on Sunday with a film session. And I think it's pretty important on the field and off the field for Drew Aller to answer this moment and get himself on track.
By all accounts, Aller has become a lot more vocal over his time at Penn State. We heard Andy Kotelnicki talk about that being a more collaborative process in terms of game planning and putting things together for Aller. So those lines of communication theoretically are there. And so you just want to see, okay, what's the growth like from one week to the next? Where are the improvements made? Things like that. One thing with Aller, wasn't all bad We finally saw him chuck it deep a couple times. Devontae Ross drew a DPI early in the game and then had a really fantastic 42-yard touchdown catch while being interfered with in the second half. And those are the types of plays where, especially the deep ball that Ross scored on, where you see Aller do it, kind of similar to the Kyron Hudson touchdown last week. And you're just like, yeah, like this guy is it. Like he has everything you could want from your quarterback, but really does come back to that consistency piece.
Let's talk about the offensive line. Actually, let me give one more note on Aller. Just a quick quote from James Franklin, because Mark Brennan led off the press conference by asking about Aller's performance and evaluation from James. He said, quote, "I didn't think he was in his normal rhythm. We had some drops. He had some throws that he normally makes that he didn't. That was a major factor for us on third down, but we just couldn't seem to get in the rhythm on offense, and that was part of it." So again, I think if he's in rhythm, things tend to sort themselves out for the 10 guys around him. If he's not in rhythm, it's going to be hard for those 10 guys to feel like they are also in sync. And when you're talking about being in sync, the offensive line's in that spotlight right now. We spent 7 or 8 months of this offseason discussing all the pieces that they have back up front. We addressed it on the pregame podcast coming into this matchup that you're looking for a step forward from the offensive line. There's no doubt about it. They had more success on the ground today. Penn State did. Nick Singleton had more success. Katron Allen had more success. But in terms of consistency, play by play, series by series, that authority just is not there right now. And James Franklin says there is meat left on the bone through these first 2 matchups. You're fresh off writing a story about this offensive line. James said we're going to continue to see 7 players involved on a steady basis. He doesn't think the rotation or bringing guys off the sideline is really a main factor in what has maybe not gone right and living up to expectations. But he said it. He thinks this is going to be one of the best groups in the country. And yet he doesn't feel like they have performed at that level through 2 games. And, of course, we have to be honest, we have not seen that yet as well.
Yeah, the rotation part of it, just to get that out of the way, I think that's an easy thing to bring up or think about. But you look at what the offensive line did today. They did do some 6 O-line sets early. I don't really know if we saw any 7 O-line sets in the early going, but it was the same 5 guys for the whole first half. When you talk about Shelton, Ioane, Dawkins, Donka, and Rucci. We saw TJ Shanahan come in at right guard for Donka in the third quarter and play a couple series. And then in the fourth quarter, Cooper Cousins came in. Shanahan slid over to left guard in place of Venga Ioane, and then Cooper Cousins played right guard. It wasn't really like that last week. Last week we saw Shanahan and Cousins come in, I think, pretty early and take a series. So this was one of those games where we talk about it, where it's like that rotation shortens up a little bit. And I think we saw that a little bit on the offensive side of the ball, not so much on defense, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, so that stood out to me with the offensive line. But I asked Drew Shelton. He was made available to us after the game. And so it was pretty easy. Just asked him, James Franklin says that there's still meat left on the bone for you guys on the offensive line. What does that mean? And he said that they have to be able to put the team on their back. And they said when it's 4th and short, they have to get that extra half foot to get there. I think that was referencing Katron Allen getting stopped on, I believe it was like a 4th and 2, that pretty deep in FIU territory, that short-circuited a Penn State drive. So I think that, we came in and everyone was saying really nice things about this offensive line. I think when you see them out there, you can see all the different pieces and all the different potential out there, but for whatever reason, it hasn't quite gelled a little bit. Aller got sacked twice today. I'd have to go back and look. I don't quite remember if those were explicitly on a certain offensive lineman or if it's a combination coverage sack, quarterback error, things like that. But yeah, and I think that you come away from these first 2 games and you still see the potential there. Like you still see that this team is going to be in contention for that Joe Moore Award. But you're going to need to see the product out there. You need to see them produce in terms of making some big holes for those running backs and keeping that quarterback upright and giving them time to make some stuff happen.
Last week, Penn State's running backs, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, 43 yards for Katron on 8 carries. Obviously, they got the backups involved in that matchup. They did not do that today because of how the score flow was going. But Nick Singleton, 8 carries for 19 yards. And, not big wow performances from those guys. A little bit different today. Katron Allen, career high, 144 yards on the ground. Big part of that was a run late, 67-yard touchdown run for Allen, his career long. And then Nick Singleton, 76 yards on 13 carries. He had a long of 16 after only having a long of 6. I think right now you look at just pure runners, I'd give the edge to Katron Allen through the first 2 games of the season. I feel like he's seen the field a little bit better. And we certainly are seeing a different level of burst, I think, from him. It's a little tougher to measure when they're not going up against Big Ten power conference defenses yet. But I would say he's been the more efficient and arguably the more explosive runner so far out of the backfield. I mean, we see Nick Singleton being a force as a receiver at different times, not so much today, but I think he had 4 catches last game. But thus far, I think Katron Allen has been as advertised, Daniel, and that's a good thing. And it's nice to see, even on a day where you come out of this and people are hemming and hawing about the offensive line, you were able to get some daylight for these runners in some circumstances. I think they were able to clear pass a little bit better than they did last year. It seemed a little bit more muddled for these running backs last week. And we'll give credit, though, as well to Katron Allen for carving his own path on some occasions and rumbling through things. And if he can run like that all season long, just like how he finished last year, again, he's over 5.3 yards per carry now in 5 of the last 6 games. Then you've got a guy that you can really feed the ball to as much as you need to. And I think the key will be getting Nick Singleton kind of rounded back into form as a complete kind of back. We've seen him go through some ebbs and flows in his career. Sometimes injuries have played a role. Sometimes I think it's about where he's seen the field. But right now, I think there's more gas in the tank for Nick Singleton to take another step forward as a rusher. And so that's good news for the ground game as well.
Yeah, when you talk about the numbers for Allen and Singleton on the per carry basis, last week against Nevada, they were combined 3.88 yards per carry. Today against FIU, it was 7.59. And if you really want to be ticky-tack and you take out that 67-yard run by Allen, which we all saw it happen, you can't really take it away. It's still 5.46 yards per carry. So there was some bad today. You talk about Katron Allen getting stopped on a 4th and 2. There was one play where they had Nick Singleton going horizontal and seemed like he had the options to either cut it upfield early or keep taking it around the edge. And he picked door number 3, which was run into the pile. That wasn't really a shining moment for the ground game. But I still think with Singleton, like you see him get downhill. You see, I think we're starting to see kind of what Stan Drayton is talking about. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, I see where Stan Drayton could look at this and say, okay, like there's some work you can do here. I feel like at the end of last year, a lot of us were sort of like, okay, Singleton, he's great, all those things. So we've had the chance to look at him a little bit more. But just to go back to Katron Allen, I mean, he ended last year on a hot streak. We heard a lot about this offseason, how he was healthy. He was getting that work in. It wasn't really about getting himself back to a point. It was about improving and building on things. And I think the fact that he's come into the season and started it the way he does, he has really validated that.
I just want to note one thing, because you said we saw the Katron Allen touchdown run. You can't take it away. They did take away the Drew Shelton 2-point conversion score, but I wanted to circle back to that because that was a lot of fun. And we talked to Drew Shelton afterwards. He got the pass as a tackle on that play, ended up running to the end zone. There was a flag on it, wiped off the board, but he broke out the Saquon Barkley arm flail touchdown celebration. And a funny anecdote here is I brought it up to him after the game. I said, how long had you been planning that celebration? Because he said, this play has been in the works for a long time, as you'd imagine, trying to get it right, trying to perfect it. And he said they came up with a plan for a group offensive line celebration, but as soon as that ball got in his hands and he crossed the goal line, he said that went away and he just broke out his own thing. He became a skill player in that moment. And so maybe we'll see. We've been talking about this for a while. They've got some athletic offensive linemen. They've got a lot in the field. They're all over the place. Is Kotelnicki going to find ways to get the ball in these guys' hands occasionally and put some stuff on film? Well, there you go. There's one example right there. And in terms of receptions today, though, Devontae Ross certainly stood out. He had 3 catches for 60-plus yards, but his biggest was a 42-yard touchdown grab. And quite frankly, over recent years, I don't see a lot of Penn State receivers making that play in the end zone, especially taking on the contact from a defender. He also had a 17-yard punt return on the day to set up Penn State with the ball in FIU territory to start their drive. And I think now we're getting to see the sample size grow for Devontae Ross. I asked James Franklin about him after this matchup, and he said, this summer when he was dealing with bumps and bruises, and we had heard about this, and it was limiting him through preseason camp, they thought this summer he might be out until week 4, the Oregon game. And so for him to be on the field last week, had a 4-yard catch on a 4th and short, didn't do much else, but now returning punts, flashing there, catching touchdown, flashing there. James Franklin said the confidence is going up. They feel like he can be more full go now. And we said it last week that we would get more Devontae Ross as things went on. We got it today. And I think as much as we're poking some holes in the offensive plan and kind of poking holes in the offseason narrative a little bit, one thing that has lived up to the bill thus far is you've gotten glimpses at why exactly there's been so high on Trevor Pena, on Devontae Ross, and on Kyron Hudson. It was more Hudson and Pena in game 1, more Ross this time around, but these guys are going to get the bulk of reps at receiver. You saw it today in a closer game. They're not going to lead the field much, and I'll have to check the snap count as we get to our next episode perhaps, but certainly got the sense that the roles between Liam Clifford and Devontae Ross were largely flipped today. We felt like we saw a lot more of Ross than Clifford. It was the opposite last week, and we also got a note Luke Reynolds, very significant in the pass game today. A lot of short range receptions for him, but 7 catches for 58 yards, had a team high 9 targets. And I think we're starting to understand he is an integral part of this offense as well, going to be a mainstay moving forward as a sophomore at that spot. Anything else you want to address on offense before we turn our attention to defense, who did pitch a shutout today?
I think with Ross, Franklin mentioned, I think the phrase he used was without limitations in terms of what they got from Ross today. And then the Reynolds part of it, I think stands out too. Sort of like, to go back to what I mentioned earlier, you came out of the Nevada game and it's like, where are the touches for Devontae Ross? Where are the touches for all the tight ends? And you come out today, Devontae Ross catches a touchdown, Khalil Dinkins catches a touchdown. You saw Luke Reynolds heavily involved. And especially in some third downs, some different situations when you really wanted to move the chains, Drew Aller looks to him. So now you've seen them. So, Penn State, they are really getting all these different guys on tape as playmakers, as people who factor in their offense. And I think as you get deeper in the Big Ten schedule, you're just giving teams a lot more to prepare for, a lot more to look at, which I think is a good benefit of trying some different things and doing different things through this non-conference slate.
Let's talk about the defense, because through 2 matchups under coordinator Jim Knowles, this team has only given up 1 touchdown, and that occurred with about 25 seconds left against Nevada and a bunch of third-string young talent on the field for that defense. So far, so good in terms of the scoreboard. There were some bend but don't break moments today. 3 of the first 4 FIU possessions reached Penn State territory. But there were some key stops there. There was interception, Alonzo Ford, defensive tackle, back-to-back games where you get a big lineman coming down with the ball on an interception based off.
First time since 1990.
First time since 1990 that's happened, back-to-back games. But, Daniel, I think, again, this defense is going to get to work tomorrow. I think Jim Knowles is going to be angry. We've heard that Jim Knowles gets mean. I think for a coordinator who just had a shutout, he's going to have a lot of things to maybe be mean about with these guys on Sunday in the film session. But that speaks volumes about where we think this defense is. If anyone was wondering if there might be a step back or a lull in this process with Jim Knowles, James Franklin said he feels like the defense is playing slower than they will right now. He thinks they're still kind of thinking about Jim Knowles' scheme versus just playing in Jim Knowles' scheme. And he hopes that changes moving ahead with more experience. But I think you come out of this and you're starting to see new pieces make an impact, whether it's Amari Campbell at linebacker, or King Mack in safety did some things today, and certainly Chaz Coleman at defensive end. And you're starting to put some pieces together on what this might look like down the road when rotations get tighter and they focus a little bit more on their key players. Defense seems like it's right on track to me. I think they're right on track to be that national contending unit. And again, even with some bend but don't break moments against FIU, whose quarterback, by the way, was the preseason conference player of the year on offense for them. So keep in mind, no slouch at QB on the opposite side of the field today. But Daniel, what was your overall takeaway now that we've got 2 games in which Penn State just has not given up touchdowns?
You think about the narrative with Jim Knowles coming in that it's going to take a couple of years, that it's not going to click right away. And then you pair that with the fact that this is a Penn State team that was built to win right now. And I think that was something that a lot of people were talking about, a lot of people were thinking about. And so to see Penn State start this way, even though it is against Nevada and FIU, I think that you take it as a real positive. There definitely was the bend but don't break in the first half. I think that the way that FIU approached the game too, with how aggressive they were on fourth down and Penn State's ability to get some stops, I think that really reflects well and makes things look good for Penn State in that respect. But yeah, I think that you've seen so many different guys rotate through and so many different players get the opportunity to make plays, to put things on tape. And you really do wonder, like, what will this look like when they do shorten that rotation against Oregon, where I think we'll see some snap shares really spike, from 50% to 75%, that type of thing. But I think that you look at it and there's no denying that Penn State has talent. I don't think that there's any denying that you have a scheme and a system that is difficult to go against and is going to put players in the spots to make plays. I think if you're Jim Knowles and you're Penn State now, you're refining, okay, what's the talent that we're going to put out there that we can put in those spots that will make plays on a reliable basis. Mm-hmm. I think that you're really putting the pieces of that equation together right now in non-conference play, and it's going pretty well.
Yeah. Talk about reliability. Denied Dennis Sutton, ho-hum, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hurries, continues to be a tone setter. There was a 3rd and short, might have been a 4th and short. Leading up to that, I pointed it out to you, like the crowd was getting loud. And Denied Dennis Sutton, people are in a 3-point stance next to him, extends his arms, looks to the sky, and just appears to scream, which I'm sure was a little bit frazzling for the FIU quarterback and offensive lineman, but that's who this dude is. Like, he is kind of on a rampage right now out there, and it's fun to follow. You also got, his new co-starter out there in Zariah Fisher, who we expected to be the starter, all the offseason. He was banged up during preseason camp, didn't get to play a lot, didn't play in game 1, but he was out there. He actually, to me, Daniel, probably exceeded my expectations. He played more than I thought he would. Part of that is because it was a 20-0 game in the 3rd quarter. We didn't think that would be the case. But I think ultimately Zariah Fisher, he showed some speed. He showed that get off some of those snaps. He didn't get home every time, but he was flashing in the quarterback's face. He was getting into the backfield. And I think that's all you really wanted to see from Zariah Fisher, a 6-year senior who had not entered a game since the 2023 Peach Bowl down in Atlanta.
Fisher definitely passed the eye test today. There were a couple different times in the second half where I pulled up the live stats and I was trying to find him on the list, and he didn't record any statistics, and he didn't get credited with any quarterback hurries. We'll see what PFF and maybe some advanced charting says, because I think he got to the quarterback a couple times. He made a couple things happen in the backfield, but I think that's a big thing. If you're a defensive end, and we're trying
Daniel, can I pop in? Because
yes.
I did just check. According to PFF, from this game, number 1 on the team in pressures, Zariah Fisher with 7 of them. So I guess we can trust our minds. Take it with a grain of salt. They do great work at PFF, but it's also sometimes a matter of opinion with some of these. He had 7 pressures, and we'll get to the guy who was next on that list in just a second, because he also continues to turn heads at defensive end. But it goes to show you, look beyond the box score when it comes to some of these edge rushers. They impact the game in key ways. It's kind of a domino effect with defensive ends, and they're getting paid a lot of money in the NFL for a reason.
For sure. So, yeah, I think to have that, good. I'm glad that I was seeing what I thought I was seeing.
Yes.
PFF agrees with me. But, yeah, you saw him be disruptive. You saw him get back there. You saw some good get off. I think that was really positive to take away from this with Fisher, because, yeah, we didn't really know what to expect. Like you said, hadn't played since the Peach Bowl, had played that season, but he's in a rotation, and we're too busy watching Chop Robinson and Denied Dennis Sutton and Adisa Isaac. You're the 4th or 5th banana in that. Mm-hmm. So we really don't know him as a player. You can hear everything from the coaches and teammates, everything, but until we see you on the grass, we don't know for sure. So I think that this was a really good step forward. I think that in terms of having concerns about that defensive end depth, this helps alleviate it, at least for one day. Moving forward, when you reset the depth chart in your head a little bit, maybe there's a question mark next to Zariah Fisher's name, and you start to erase it a little bit because you know what you're going to get now. We'll see what he does against Villanova. But I think that was one of, like, I was trying to figure out the way to make him like my defensive player of the game at one point when it was still like a 20-0 game and nothing had really happened, because I had just been really impressed with him. That went elsewhere, ended up giving him the notable performance tag. But yeah, I came away feeling very good about Zariah Fisher on this defensive line.
I had him pegged on our pregame show for maybe 15 to 20 snaps, get his feet underneath him a little bit. He was right around 35 snaps today against FIU. And I think we're starting to see pretty clearly who the immediate backups are at defensive end. Ivan Kamaju is still in this conversation, but Chaz Coleman, Jalen Harvey are that wave two at the edge rusher spot. And I mean, Chaz Coleman is a guy that I feel pretty good about all the time we spent talking about this dude in August, because if we got to September, he just kind of disappeared, went by the wayside, faded. It's one of those things where, hey, it was a nice story. We'll see if he can kind of break through at some point this season. But no, he is gone from kind of this exciting, fun freshman story to, I would argue, Daniel, becoming kind of a necessity for this defense if they want to get to where they want to be. Coleman today, second on the team according to PFF with 5 total pressures. He had 4 tackles, 2 of those tackles for loss, his first career sack. And James Franklin praised his self-awareness on that sack because it was a strip sack. Got his wits about him, found the football, located it, ran in the right direction, which can be a tricky thing for young defenders, and he almost made his way to the end zone. I mean, we saw the athleticism. He picks up that ball, starts moving. You're reminded he played quarterback, receiver, and was a basketball standing out the high school level. He gets tackled at the 5-yard line. That immediately leads to Nick Singleton's touchdown, so give him the assist there. Overall, just checking in with some players, asking James Franklin was asked about this in press conference as well. Chaz Coleman just continues to check off the boxes where guys are no longer talking about him as maybe a luxury item for this defense. They're talking about him as kind of being one of the crew. And that's a quick emergence for somebody who came to campus in May and handled their first practice rep on like July 29th.
I know that Mark and I had staked out a little bit the position of, okay, all those reps against Nevada last week were nice. The clips were very intriguing. But you got to get the guy on the ground. You got to make the play. It's not necessarily about, look at what he did. It's, okay, let's get a play. Let's get the guy on the ground. That's one of the things I always go back to in terms of how I think about pass rushing. Like, quarterback hits are nice. Pressures are nice. They're a big part of the game. But a sack, like, that's like a tangible thing that can change a game. And so we finally got those tangible things from Chaz Coleman, and he did it in his second game. Like to see that leap from, week 1 where it was all these almosts. It was a really nice move and he almost made the play. This was really cool and he was almost there. Today, like, he was there. He made the nice play and he was there. I think that's what you want to see from week 1 to week 2. I asked Dom DeLuca about this just accelerated curve that he's been on because he got here in the summer and everything like that. And DeLuca was just like, yeah, like, this is a ton of fun. Like, this guy is making plays. Like, you're seeing him grow. Like, it's really big for this defense. And I think, you talk about Coleman and Harvey being those next 2 up. You can really start to fill in that depth chart a little bit and, feel better about it as you move forward. I think the question marks are really starting to disappear. At the same time, Harvey, Coleman, Kamaju, young guys, they're going to have to play under some really bright lights. Mm-hmm. You would think that you give James Franklin credit that I feel like a lot of times he has players prepared for those types of environments, but there's a lot of it where it's you don't know until they get out there. But I think that right now, those young defensive ends, they can only be building confidence so far.
Yeah, that's what we heard a lot in feedback post-game was the confidence that Chaz Coleman's going to be able to take out of Sunday's film session and knowing that he belongs at this level and knowing he belongs getting 20-plus snaps. He's at about 50 snaps now on the season, and you put him through this Villanova game when he should play a bunch. And to James Franklin's point earlier this week, they want to get to game 4 with these young edge rushers and not feel like they have young edge rushers. They want to feel like they have seasoned guys who are performing more like vets and acting like it. And what we've heard about acting like a vet, that has been Coleman to a T. watching film, self-corrections on the practice field, getting together with Deion Barnes, blowing up Deion Barnes' phone late at night. A lot of good stuff from Chaz Coleman, and thus far showing up on the football field through 2 matchups. And Daniel, I think when we look at other defensive notes, a few guys I wanted to point to, Tony Rojas, now that he's healthy, I think he had a really strong game last week, more run this week, led the team with 10 tackles. Fiery player. I like the way he kind of sets the tone in a little way, like the night Dennis Sutton seems to, just in between the snaps, the way he kind of rallies the troops a little bit. I think that's an important piece of the puzzle for this defense. And then King Mack, we saw it on special teams last week, a 73-yard kickoff return set up a Penn State score. This time around, he had a really jarring hit, probably the hardest hit that I saw today along the sidelines in the open field. And he also had a key pass breakup on a 4th down play from FIU. Ultimately, we've talked about this a lot, whether it's receiver or over at linebacker with Amari Campbell, the guys that you hope will be plug-and-play additions to a national championship caliber program, you're getting plug-and-play results through 2 games.
Yeah, King Mack, it's like the smallest guy on the field makes the biggest hit. It was one of those juxtaposition things, and I think it fits in with the type of player that he is. He's one of those Florida guys that is really fearless when he's out there and has all the confidence and is going to go out and wants to make plays.
You made a good point, Daniel, too. You said he knows a lot of dudes on that FIU team, being from the South Florida scene. So it was a little personal for him perhaps today, too.
Yeah, Penn State had him do the narration on the hype video that was released Friday evening. And then after the game, he was taking photos with everybody out there, which it's cool to see, especially in non-con play. I know that we've got some people on the board who love looking at Brendan Cam and seeing guys talk and try to connect the dots of how people might know each other. And I like to do that too. But yeah, I think that Rojas being taking that step at linebacker, I think is really important. He was someone that coming into the year, I felt like was maybe a little underrated. I know that we had talked about his ceiling still being really high, but he was coming off a year in which he played through an injury. It felt like that hype around him that he had entering his sophomore year had died down a little bit. It was all right, let's see what you can do type of year. He's been really steady out there so far, which that linebacker play can go either way sometimes. And if you're wrong, it can look pretty bad. So I think that him being steady there has been nice. But yeah, you just look up and down the step chart and so many guys are getting reps, and they're really trying all these different combinations. And that's another thing too, with some of the bend but don't break. What might this look like if they shorten that rotation?
Sure.
If they were to go with the A team at different points across this game. But I just think to wrap up, it's just been very impressive. And put a bow on it, Zachy Wheatley. Need to make sure to mention him. He's been, I think, playing very confidently, on the back end.
He had a big smile on his face when we were talking in post game, because I just was dictating to him how I felt like he was in control of his situation. He was in control of this defense. It felt like at times he made some key tackles that prevented good FIU plays from becoming great FIU plays. And he very, very clearly kind of in our discussion is in an awesome place right now as a 5th-year senior. We talked about him being a dark horse All-American candidate. I think he has lived up to that billing through a couple of matchups. And I think one other name I want to reference, because as you said, you're not getting full A-team from the defense, but they're finding some new pieces. They're learning about new guys. Keep an eye on Kenny Wosley, because even though he was out of the starting lineup today with Zion Tracy back, and it's good to see Zion Tracy back involved in that nickel role, but Kenny Wosley, who started at the opener at the nickel spot, still was over 30 snaps today. And we saw him backing up Zion, getting some work there in slot coverage, but also playing on the perimeter, which is not something that we really had seen a lot on the practice field. And they think highly of this young man's IQ and his competitive streak. So as a redshirt freshman, we've talked about this cornerback room being deep. We'll maybe make another little bit more room for Kenny Wosley in his 2nd year on campus based on what we've seen so far. Daniel, I want to finish up on some special teams takeaways. Ryan Barker had 1 field goal blocked. He made his others. He was 4 for 4 on field goals last week. So James Franklin seemed to point out exactly what went wrong on that block. It was a missed blocking assignment, not according to plan and what they teach at Penn State. So not going to really hold that against the kicker. Barker's been really solid so far as a 2nd-year starter. Gabe Nwosu at punter really showed off his skills. He showed off the boot today. It was a 67-yard kick at one point was a highlight. He had a couple kickoffs go out of bounds, with James Franklin kind of pointing to as a low light for special teams. But we got our first look at Wosu as a punter, and we understand why he won the job coming out of preseason camp over Riley Thompson. And then I think we also just have to point, the return game looks good. It looks like a weapon. And I said it last week. It feels like in recent seasons, the motto on returns for Penn State has been like, don't screw up. Just get the ball in the hands of our offense. Please don't screw up. Now it's guys making plays. We saw Devontae Ross with a 17-yard return as a punt on a punt today. We saw last week Trevor Pena with a 10-yard return on a punt. We saw King Mack almost take one to the house on a kickoff return last week. So starting to stack up some evidence that this can be a weapon instead of just kind of a placeholder between your offense and your defense.
Yeah, to run down all those areas pretty quickly. To start with the return game, I mean, James Franklin, he put it out there in August that, hey, we're going to win games because of special teams this year. And I think that you're starting to see that a little bit, where I think in the past you would consider the punt return game like a net neutral, where you weren't, it wasn't hurting you, but it wasn't necessarily helping you. It was go out there, make the fair catch, don't lose that hidden yardage when you let it bounce. Early this season, we've seen it be a positive. And to get Devontae Ross in space, I know that James Franklin said that he thinks he's the type of player who can scare people when he has the ball in his hands. I think we got a little bit of a look at that today. I mean, that Wosu punt, like, he boomed that one. It's kind of funny sometimes when you see the reaction of the returner right away, and he immediately turned around and started going back. But on top of that, so it's a 67-yard punt officially. So I think in the air went probably 77, close to that. I'll have to rewatch that. But when it hit the ground, like, it died. Like, it hit the ground and bounced straight up in the air. And the FIU returner, Saquon Jean-Pierre, he just ate it, like, dropped on it. And I think a lot of times when you think about these long punts, it's like, oh, like, you got a friendly roll, or you tacked a little bit on where it bounced and then it just went, like, it took off. I mean, he hit that and it just died. Like, that was really, really impressive to see. Punted 3 times today, average of 53.3 yards. All 3 were down inside the 20. Davian Collins and Elliott Washington got one down at the 2. And then they combined on his last punt, they combined for the tackle, I think at like the 17-yard line or so. So good things from special teams so far. The Barker block, it's kind of funny hearing James Franklin talk, because you see coaches where something happens and they'll be really mad, or you can tell there's like an emotion they're trying to hide, different things. With this and the I think it was the blocked extra point against Minnesota last year, where Franklin said the exact same thing happened. It's like a genuine bewilderment from him, where he just cannot understand why it happens, which is something a little bit different from him. One line of questioning that emerged with Wosu post-game was, hey, we heard that you've got this big leg and that you made a run at field goal kicking. Could you have gotten the call on that play? Like, is there a time when you can make a call? And Wosu said, coach's decision, like, I don't really have anything to do with that. But he did confirm what Franklin said about, hitting a 62-yarder in Beaver Stadium during preseason camp. I know that we thought we might see Wosu in that situation when Barker trotted out there, but I mean,
53, I think 53-yarder.
Yep. Yeah. But I mean, Barker's got a pretty good leg too. So that's something to monitor as we go forward. If there's like a borderline, too long to go for, but maybe you're too close to punt, do you see Wosu come out and try one of those super long field goals? But yeah, I mean, I think right now you feel good about where Penn State's special teams are. And I think the way that I'll probably think about it now moving forward is no longer a neutral or slight positive. I think it can be a very positive thing for this team moving forward.
That's going to bring us to the finish line of this post-game podcast. We'll have a lot more for you over at Lions247.com. We already have a few stories up there. We got a few more in the works. Mark Brennan will have his grades up for Penn State, his top takeaways. We'll have our snap count breakdown coming for you out of this game as well. A lot over at Lions247.com. And plus, Penn State picked up a commitment today. Former Rutgers defensive tackle commit Tavion Branch, an in-state target for the Nittany Lions, jumped on board. That went official during the game, and we got coverage of that over at Lions247.com. We'll find some time to get Tyler Calvaruso on this show next week, break down some of the recruiting takeaways from getting a bunch of prospects into Beaver Stadium. But a lot on the site between now and our next episode. I encourage you to check that out. For now, Daniel, good stuff as always. Another evening in Beaver Stadium. We'll turn the lights out behind us when we walk out. I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.